It had been one of those weeks that chews you up and spits you out. Meetings stacked back to back, emails at 2 in the morning, and a single stupid problem that no one could agree on. By Friday, I was done, not tired, not even annoyed so much as hollowed out. I grabbed the dog, booked a cabin on Airbnb at the last minute, and just drove. I needed a place where the world wouldn't tap my shoulder every few minutes. The drive took about an hour and a half. About 20 minutes before the cabin, I stopped in this tiny town, the kind of place where the main road feels like a movie set and the people at the diner know more about your life than you do. I bought a bottle of wine, then pulled into a small restaurant a minute down the road and ate something that tasted better because I didn't have to think about it. It felt normal, almost ordinary. Exactly the kind of ordinary I wanted to hold on to for the night. I pulled up to the cabin just before 8. The light was soft, the sky a bruised blue, and there was time to start a fire before it got too dark. The place sat at the end of a gravel lane that branches off from the main road, a 5-minute bump down a narrow track. The driveway wound around to the back and stopped along the right side. The porch faced the trees, and every wall of the cabin had windows so you could look out and see nothing but the woods. There was no cell service. It petered out a minute down the road and didn't come back for the whole stretch. That's part of why I picked it. No pings, no tiny interruptions. The listing promised electricity, a clean, updated bathroom, a fridge, and a microwave. Not fancy, clean, comfortable. The reviews were glowing in that way places get when people want to promise you peace. The dog curled up near my feet while the fire ate the night. The wood popped, the flames licked upward and sent sparks that the wind stole and swallowed. It was quiet in a way that felt like a presence. The kind of quiet where every small noise gets more interesting. A twig falling sounded like a footstep. The far-off call of a night bird sounded like someone clearing their throat. We sat there until about 11. Then I put the fire out, came inside, and got into bed. The dog nosed around for a minute and settled. I scrolled through my phone more out of habit than anything, and then I put it down. 45 minutes into being in bed while the house hummed and the dog breathed slow, I heard a soft knock at the door. It was small enough that it could have been the cabin settling. It was precise enough that it felt like someone choosing a moment. I didn't answer. I listened. Another knock, 30 seconds later, softer but deliberate. My first thought was dumb, like maybe the owner was checking in or someone got lost on the gravel road and needed help. But then the mind starts to fill in gaps with worse things, the kind of scenarios that don't make sense until they're in your chest. The front door had a window to its right that looked out onto the porch. I hit the porch light and moved to the window, pressing my face close to the glass. The window was old, the type that warped everything a little so faces looked stranger. A man stood on the porch, hands loose at his sides. He didn't pound or scream. He wasn't waving his arms or staggering in a dramatic way. He just stood there, like he'd been waiting for me to look out. He looked at me the way you look at someone you expected to see. He might have been drunk. His eyes had that unfocused sheen. When I asked him what he wanted, he tilted his head and nodded toward the door, like he thought that answered the question. "For sex," he said. I don't remember the exact sound my voice made. I remember the words. They fell into the small space between us and hung there, ridiculous and terrible and impossible. I told him this was inappropriate and that I would call the police immediately. I lied about having a GPS phone. I hoped that name, the thing cops do, the call you can't ignore, would make him step back. He turned and walked off the porch. Slow, one step at a time, not in a run, but not politely. I watched his silhouette through the warped glass until the trees swallowed him. For a moment, I convinced myself that was the end of it, that he was an idiot who would wander off and forget he existed. But then I saw the car lights through the window across from the bed. The driveway light blinked, where the running lights come on if you don't have the headlights. The car backed up. The sound of gravel shifted like someone moving around the back of the property. My head filled with small practical plans, the way your hands fill with things when you're trying to steady yourself, where a heavy object could be, what could wedge the door, what would make enough noise to attract attention. I lay there a few minutes thinking about stuff I could use. It was the strangest checklist: a lamp, a cast iron skillet, anything heavy. The bedside table had rubbing alcohol and a lighter because of COVID. One of those little, ugly artifacts from the year none of us expected. For 3 seconds, I put together a plan, so stupid it sounds like something a panic movie character would do. If he got inside, light him on fire. It wasn't a tactical decision. It was desperation looking for an edge. I pushed a dresser and a chair in front of the door. The cabin was raised off the ground, so the windows were higher than normal, which made me less worried about someone climbing in, but I still shoved furniture around like a person who knows more about rearranging than about safety. I turned the lights off, lay back down, and waited for the dawn. That night was long in the way that says a single hour stretches to a day. I didn't sleep. Every small sound was either him or the woods pretending to be him. The dog shifted now and then and nudged me. I kept the blanket tight under my chin and imagined every shape outside until my eyes learned the furniture in the dark. He never came back. When the sky turned from bad black to the pale blue of morning, I packed up. I moved slowly through the rooms, touching surfaces like someone making sure things were real. The gravel at the edge of the driveway crunched under my tires in a way that felt loud enough to wake the whole town. As soon as I hit the main road, I had service again. The little bars came back like a promise. I messaged the Airbnb owner as soon as I could. They were surprised and said nothing like that had happened before. They offered to help file a police report. I didn't. I figured I lived far away, that filing a report would be a small paperweight on a long pile, and that it probably was a one-off. A drunk idiot who mistook a cabin for an easy mark and left when he realized it wasn't worth it. After that night, quiet places felt different. I still love being alone, but there's a small part of me that checks the locks twice, that looks at windows as if they're doors. I stopped trusting silence the way I used to. It's an odd trade. I wanted peace, and I got it. But the price was a kind of worry that attaches itself to the edges of any plan to disappear for a while. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had answered that knock, or if I'd called out from the porch. Maybe the same thing, maybe nothing at all. But I keep that night in the corner of my head, a small, sharp memory that reminds me how quickly ordinary goes weird, and how you can find yourself choosing between two bad options and calling the one that feels like survival. I still take short trips sometimes. The dog still likes the backseat. I just bring a little more caution now. A flashlight with batteries that aren't half dead. A heavy piece of furniture I can move without thinking, and a phone that whether it has GPS or not, can at least make noise if I need it to. They used to joke that I was more at home under a canopy of leaves than under a city's streetlights. I grew up where trails feel like second nature, small towns, forest roads, and a weekend pack always within reach. When my dad retired, he announced he was going to walk a section of the long-distance trail that runs through our area. He kept at it for weeks, and when he reached the highlands, he asked both me and my sister to join him for short stretches. I agreed to one night, just a single overnight on Westford Ridge, partly because I liked the idea of doing something small and ordinary with him, and partly because I was curious about the place he kept talking about. People around there used to whisper about the Greenfield Triangle. Old headlines and local talk stitched together disappearances, strange vanishing acts that nobody could explain. The original case was from decades ago, a young woman who went out in the middle of winter and never came back. Other stories followed. A kid who vanished while waiting at a farm, a hunter who knew those woods like the back of his hand and simply never returned. A woman who separated from a friend to change out of soaked clothes and later was found in a spot the searchers had already combed through. Most of the vanished people had been wearing red when they were last seen. It read like a patchwork of coincidences, the kind of gossip that belongs in late-night diner booths and booths and message boards. I liked folklore. It made the landscape feel layered, like there were stories embedded under every mossy rock. When my dad mentioned Westford Ridge, I decided to push it. I wore pink from head to toe, neon socks, a pink hiking shirt, a faded pink cap. I wanted to poke at the superstition, call it a dare or a little defiance. The hike itself was exactly what I love about the woods. A warm, late summer day, light stitching through the leaves, easy footing, and clear views. We set a casual pace and aimed for a lean-to that sat about 8 miles in, a small, weathered shelter you could lean a few packs against and call camp for a night. We reached it before dusk, unloaded our gear, and found the place already occupied by 2 middle-aged women who were packing for the night. There was a guy with a small tent who set up near the stream a few dozen yards away. We made small talk, fixed dinner, and settled into the lean-to together. The air smelled of wood smoke and wet earth. I fell asleep quickly, the kind of sleep that comes from steady miles and the comfort of familiarity. Sometime in the night, I woke up because I needed to pee. The outhouse was below a short slope and felt like a trek for a quick trip, so I slipped out and went behind a patch of low brush right beside the lean-to. I wasn't even halfway through when a cold knot went through me. I had the impression of something enormous standing just beyond the leaves. It wasn't a rustle of wind or a distant animal. It felt deliberate, like the kind of attention you get when someone is staring at you across a room. There was a sound too, low and rasping, something like breath on gravel, a dry rattle that didn't belong to any animal I'd heard near a trail. I've stood within throwing distance of a bear before and known it to be startled away by noise or smell. Bears usually avoid people when they can. We'd packed our food properly, hung and stored it. This didn't sound like a bear. Whatever it was felt heavy and annoyed that I was there. I didn't grab a flashlight. It seemed unnecessary for such a short walk, and truthfully, I didn't want to turn on a light and confirm whatever was out there. I climbed back into the lean-to and closed the door as quietly as I could, my breath tight in my chest. For a few seconds, I waited for something to move away. Instead, I heard something brush along the outer wall of the shelter, a slow, deliberate scraping that left a hairline of dread in the air. Then it stopped. Silence took over, though not the same silence I'd fallen asleep in earlier. This was an emptied silence, like a room where everyone had left at once. I must have dozed off again because morning came. When I opened my eyes, the campground felt wrong. Not in the way a place feels wrong when a storm is rolling in, but wrong in the way a neighborhood feels after everyone goes inside and shuts their doors tight. The ordinary background life was absent. There were no birds arguing in the treetops, no chipmunks scolding the tent flaps, no distant bellows of a neighbor starting a generator. Everything was quiet, breath-holding quiet. We ate a quick breakfast and packed slowly, making small jokes about the night and the trail. The other hiker's tent was still pitched where he'd left it, though there was no sign of him moving. The 2 women were awake and said they'd woken a bit during the night, but heard nothing out of the ordinary. They mentioned the quiet too, like someone reaching for the same word to describe it, but not quite finding one. As we walked back along the ridge, the odd silence followed us. Even with the sun coming through the canopy and the trail warm beneath our boots, the forest felt empty in a way I'd never felt on any of my solo hikes. Normally, the trail hums with small life. The flick of wings, a woodpecker tapping, leaves shaken by squirrels. On Westford Ridge, there was none of that. We moved through green corridors where I expected 100 tiny sounds and found only space. When we got near the road, the sounds returned slowly, like a radio turning up. A jay voiced displeasure at something. A distant truck grumbled. A dog barked. The weight that had been pressing on the place eased like a tide. I still don't know what was beside me that night, standing in the dark just off the lean-to. It could have been a deer, though the breath and the sound didn't fit. It could have been another hiker, though no one claimed to have been close enough to touch the shelter. Maybe it was nothing more than the trick of a tired mind. Miles walked in half sleep, making small noises into threats. But from that night on, the stories about the Greenfield Triangle stopped being neat little campfire curiosities for me. They stopped being fodder for folklore and settled into the part of my memory that keeps a light on in the hallway. I'm glad I didn't wear red. I'm glad my pink was more of a joke than a proclamation. And when my dad talks about doing another stretch of trail, I listen a lot more carefully than I used to. Not out of fear exactly, but because some places hold on to quiet in a way that needs to be respected. The woods let you notice things, if you're paying attention. That night on Westford Ridge, I noticed the absence of everything I expected. That absence has stayed with me longer than any single shadow ever could. I'll never tell this story the same way twice, because every time I try to line up the pieces in my head, one of them slides and the shape changes. What I can tell you for sure is this. It happened when I was a kid, almost 30 years ago, and it's one of those things I told almost nobody because I figured most people would laugh it off. We were kids in rural VA, stupid and brave in equal parts, the kind of kids who thought the woods were more ours than anyone else's. That weekend started normal. It snowed, a plain, ordinary Virginia snow, maybe 4 or 6 inches. Good enough to cover the old tracks and make everything look like it belonged to a different world for a little while. Me and my buddy had the four-wheelers. You know the type. Beat-up machines that cough and roar and leave lines across the fields. We tore up the soybean field until the cold pushed us toward the tree line, then parked at the edge and went walking into the woods for the usual trespassers' inspection of rust and junk. These woods were a museum of broken things. Old equipment half swallowed by brush, a couple of cars with gaping mouths where the hoods had rotted away, and scraps of twisted metal that caught the light in odd ways. We thought it was cool, like we'd found someone's time capsule. Maybe it was the sawmill. Nobody talked about it much, not the grown-ups. At least not in a way that seemed important to kids. It was just background truth. The place had been a business once, long before we were born, and then it burned. People told half versions of the story and laughed like it was a campfire tale. We decided to build a fort back near the junk. Of course we did. We were 12, and that's what you do when you find a corner of the world that looks abandoned. I had a small hatchet on me, the kind you bring on trails in case a sapling falls and blocks the way, because that was how we rode trails then. A little survival, a little show. I chopped a small tree down, set it as a post, and then went hunting for a matching piece. That's when I wandered off. I found the deer before I found anything else. It was a carcass, gone soft around the edges, the kind of smell that rural kids grow up around and ignore like a neighbor's dog. But there were marks on it that didn't fit. Not the clean cuts of a hunter, not the ragged, neat bite marks you'd expect from a coyote. These were long, shallow grooves like something had raked at the hide and left dark lines. I stood there staring because, in a place you know, unfamiliar things stick out a lot louder. I ran back to get Jamie. He came over and looked without the same slow, stupid curiosity I had. He shrugged, like whatever it was, we weren't scared enough to leave. We went back to the fort and tied a couple of trunks together, and for a little while, everything felt like a dare that we would win. Then I saw the shape. It was maybe 50 yards away, standing between 2 trees. At first, I thought it was a stump or a weird shadow, because it wasn't a person the way people usually are. It was rounded at the edges, almost blurry, like someone had outlined a figure with a thick pen and then smudged it. I yelled, not loud, just a reflex, "Hey!" And it moved, darted behind a tree the way a rabbit might. Jamie laughed. He was always quick to laugh when something could be shrugged off. He walked over to where I pointed and made jokes. I planted myself on my heels and watched. Then, while he was still chuckling, I saw the same shape step out behind him. It was close, not right on top of him, but too close for comfort, and it was leaning in a way that made me want to jerk back. I screamed. Maybe it was the sound of shock, maybe pure instinct. I didn't stop to think which. I ran for the field the way you run when you've decided the woods are suddenly not your friend. Jamie was behind me. I could hear him. Then his footsteps shifted and got quieter, and I turned, just once, and saw him peel off a different path. For a second, I felt betrayed by the way sounds can lie to you, the way one set of feet can pretend to be 2. There was a ditch along the edge of the woods, a big, ugly thing you don't notice until you need to cross it. I cleared it in a jump that, to this day, I don't understand how my legs made. My chest was burning, and my throat felt wrong when I hit the field. I looked back, and there was Jamie, hunched over, hands on his knees, breathing like he'd done a hard sprint. He looked up at me with that stupid, half-panicked grin and said, "Why do you think I'm out of breath?" We didn't say anything to each other. The four-wheelers waited where we'd left them. We got on and went home like nothing had happened, but nothing felt normal. When we told his parents, they laughed and told us to stay out of the woods. That answer, shrugged, amused, felt like a good brush-off. You can't tell adults something weird and expect anything else. They tell you to go play, and that's the end of it. Jamie had a better idea. His grandmother lived a few blocks away, and she'd lived in town her whole life. Old people have a way of answering the things kids worry about with strange, plain phrases. We figured if anyone knew whether something was wrong with the woods, she would. She sat us down at her kitchen table and poured coffee into a cup that smelled like melted butter. She didn't look surprised when we told her. She listened and then told us about the sawmill, how, back in her youth, there'd been an explosion that took a bunch of lives. The town cleaned what it needed to, but they couldn't haul everything away. Stuff was left to rot. The old equipment, the cars, those weren't mysteries. They were part of the cleanup nobody wanted to pay to finish. When she told us that, pieces clicked into place in a way that didn't make me feel better. If the sawmill had blown and people died, if wood and cars and metal had been left because cleaning costs money, then the place had been carrying history under the brush for decades. Her smile was patient and sad, and then she said something that lodged itself in my head like a stone in a shoe. People forget sometimes. Don't mean we're the only ones that never left. We left her porch in a kind of daze. The woods stopped being just a place to ride. For a long time after that, every creak in the house, every sudden gust that rattled windows, felt like something else reaching for you.